The standing ovation lasted 22 seconds. 300 people in NBC's Studio One, on their feet, clapping for the man who had become the most recognized voice on the planet. Bob Marley, the Lion, the prophet in dreadlocks who had walked onto stages in countries where people had never heard a word of English and made them sing along anyway. But Johnny Carson was not clapping. He was watching Marley walk. Specifically, he was watching the right foot, the way it landed a fraction late on every step, the way the weight shifted left, the way the whole body compensated so smoothly you would miss it unless you had spent 30 years studying the way people move when they are hiding something. Marley sat down, placed his right hand on the armrest, a heavy silver ring, the Lion of Judah, caught the overhead lights. "Welcome," Carson said. "Thank you, brother. You walked in here like a man carrying something." Marley turned the ring once with his thumb. "Everybody carries something. Mine just has a longer story." Carson put down his cue cards. The segment was supposed to run 12 minutes. It ran 47. I often see comments from people who didn't realize they weren't subscribed. If you enjoy the channel, please take a second to check and make sure you are subscribed. It is free and it really helps us keep the show growing. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. To understand what happened on that stage in Burbank, you have to go back 4 years to a house on Hope Road in Kingston, Jamaica, in December of 1976. Bob Marley was 31 years old. He was not yet the icon the world would remember. He was something more complicated. A man caught between two political machines tearing his country apart. The People's National Party and the Jamaica Labour Party had turned Kingston into a battlefield, and Marley, who refused to pick a side, had agreed to headline a free concert called Smile Jamaica. It was supposed to be about music. It was never about music. 2 days before the concert, 7 armed men walked through the back gate of 56 Hope Road. Rita Marley was shot in the head. The bullet lodged in her hair. Marley's manager, Don Taylor, was hit 5 times. Marley took rounds to the chest and the arm. 48 hours later, he walked onto a stage at National Heroes Park, his arm in a sling, and played for 90 minutes. What you are about to hear is drawn from the details of 2 real lives, their documented struggles, their known histories, their private silences, and imagines the conversation that the evidence of those lives always seemed to be pointing toward. The facts about Bob Marley are real. The facts about Johnny Carson are real. The meeting between them and what was said lives in the space between what we know and what we can feel must have been true. After the shooting, Marley left Jamaica, not as a rock star on holiday, but as a man in exile. He rented a flat in Chelsea, London, and spent months writing music in a studio that smelled like damp concrete and cigarette smoke. The album he made there, Exodus, would later be named the greatest album of the 20th century by Time magazine. But when he was making it, he was just a man who had been driven from his home, writing about a promised land he could no longer reach. And that was only part of what he was carrying. In 1977, during a football match in Paris, he injured his right toe. Doctors found acral lentiginous melanoma, a rare, aggressive skin cancer. The treatment was simple: amputate the toe. 1 surgery. He would walk again in weeks. Marley refused. In the Rastafari faith, the body is the temple of Jah. The Nazirite vow forbids the cutting of any part of the body. To cut was to desecrate. By early 1980, the cancer had begun to spread. Marley knew. Rita knew. His inner circle knew. The world did not. This was the man who sat down across from Johnny Carson on February 14, 1980, and the conversation that followed would strip them both bare. Carson opened the way he always opened: easy, professional, controlled. "So, new album coming. Tell me about the music." "The music is the message, brother. Always the message." "And what's the message this time?" "Same message. Love, unity, justice." The audience clapped. Standard exchange. 3 polite minutes leading to a performance and a commercial break. But Carson wasn't satisfied. He had been watching Marley since the walk-on. Something was sitting behind those steady eyes. "You wrote a song called War," Carson said. "One of the most powerful protest songs in a generation. Tell me about writing that one." Marley's expression shifted, just the smallest loosening around the eyes. "I didn't write it." Carson blinked. "You didn't write your own song?" "The words belong to His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie. He spoke them at the United Nations in 1963. I took them and gave the music." "So you set a speech to reggae?" Marley leaned forward. "I carried a message. That is what I do. "I am not a singer, Mr. Carson. I am the man who carries the message." The studio went quiet, the kind of quiet that falls when someone says something that doesn't fit the format. Carson's earpiece crackled. Johnny moved to the tour dates. Carson pulled the earpiece out and set it on the desk. He was off script now, and he knew it. "The Peace Concert," Carson said. "Kingston, 1978. You brought two political enemies onto the stage and joined their hands. How does a musician do what politicians couldn't?" Something soft moved across Marley's face. Not sadness exactly, but the ghost of it. 32,000 people in the National Heroes Arena. People dying in the streets. Not in a war, in a politics. I called Michael Manley to the stage. Then Edward Sega. I grabbed their wrists, not hands. Wrists. Hands they can pull away. Wrists they cannot. He almost smiled. For one night the killing stopped. That must have been the greatest moment of your life. And something broke, just at the edges. I went home that night. I made peace for a nation. I walked through my own front door, and there was no peace there. He paused, turned the ring. Rita has carried more than any woman should carry. I have given her reasons to leave 100 times. She has not left, and I have not earned that. A woman in the third row wiped her eyes. The camera caught it. Marley noticed, stopped talking, and looked at her. The studio held its breath. Then he turned back to Carson. That pause, the glance at a stranger's tears, tells you something about the man that his songs never could. "You left Jamaica after the shooting," Carson said. "Went to London." Marley's hand closed around the ring. "They tried to silence me. My wife was shot. My manager was shot. I was shot." He said it flatly, without drama. "I did not stop singing, but they took my home. London, cold city, gray sky, no family. I wrote about the promised land because I could not go home. That is what exile does." Someone began to clap. Marley raised his left hand, a gentle, open-palmed gesture. "No applause, not for this. I want understanding." The clapping stopped. Carson's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but recognition. This was no longer a guest on a talk show, and Carson made a decision to let this conversation go where it needed to go. "I have to ask you something," Carson said. "Your right foot, you're favoring it. What happened?" The ring stopped turning. 11 seconds. On live television, 11 seconds is the kind of silence that makes producers reach for the commercial break button with trembling hands. The stage manager looked at the director. The producer's finger hovered over the button. Carson did not move. He sat in the silence the way a man sits at a bedside, when the only thing that matters is not leaving. In 1977, Marley said slowly, "I hurt my toe playing football. Doctors said cancer. They said cut it off, one toe. And my body is the temple of Jah. You do not cut the temple." Carson's voice dropped. "But what if the temple is not holding?" Marley pressed the ring hard into his finger. He did not answer. The question hung in the studio like smoke. It was the first question all night that Bob Marley could not answer, and it would not be the last. Carson asked about the tour, about Pittsburgh. Marley, for the first time, looked away. Stanley Theater, September. I was singing and my voice cracked. Not tired, broken. My engineer Errol. I saw his face. He knew what I was pretending not to know. What did he say? He said, "Bob, maybe go to Africa, rest." I told him I would go to Germany for tests and continue with Stevie Wonder. Marley paused. That was the last time Errol saw me perform. And the tests. Marley turned the ring, one full rotation. The tests told me what my body had been telling me for 2 years, that I am running out of time. Stay with me, because what comes next is the part that changes everything. Carson let the words sit there. Time. He picked up his coffee cup, looked at it, set it back down without drinking. Then he asked the question, "What are you most afraid of?" The studio lights hummed. 300 people sat without moving. The camera in position 1 held a tight close-up on Marley's face. 1 second, 2, 3. Marley's right hand was flat on the armrest. The Lion of Judah ring sat heavy on his finger. His thumb was still. 4, 5, 6. Carson did not speak, did not shift, did not reach for the coffee or the cue cards or the earpiece sitting on the desk. 7, 8, 9. The producer's hand was on the commercial break button. In the control room, someone whispered, "Do we cut?" Nobody cut. 10, 11. Marley reached down to his right hand. Slowly, with the deliberateness of a man performing a ritual, he pulled the Lion of Judah ring off his finger and placed it on Carson's desk. The silver made a small, clean sound against the wood. "I am not afraid to die," Marley said. His voice was low, stripped of performance. This was not Bob Marley the icon. This was Robert Nesta Marley, 34 years old, telling the truth. "I am afraid of being unfinished. The message is not complete. There are places I have not been. Children in Kingston, who still think a gun is the answer. I have not reached them yet. I have 11 children, Mr. Carson. Some of them I have held every day. Some I have not held enough. My son Damien, his mother is a beauty queen, and the boy has never spent a full week with his father. I am running out of time." His voice did not crack. His eyes did not water. Somehow that was worse. "And Rita," he said her name the way you say the name of someone who has seen every version of you and chosen to stay. "She was shot because of me. She has carried my children, my failures. I told the world one love, and I could not give her one faithful heart. She deserves a man who comes home. I have not been that man, and now I may not have the chance." The studio was so still you could hear the camera motors. Carson sat with both hands flat on the desk and for the first time looked like a man who did not know what to say. Then he said something no one expected. "The winter of 1971, Carson said quietly. "My second marriage had just ended. I came to this studio every night and made 12 million people laugh. And every night when the lights went off, I sat in my dressing room in the dark. Not because there was nowhere to go, because I had forgotten how to be a person when the cameras weren't running." Marley looked at him. Really looked, not at the host, but at the man. "You say you're afraid of being unfinished," Carson said. His fingers were trembling, just a fine vibration. "I've been afraid of something worse, that I finished a long time ago, and everything since has been the performance of a man pretending he still has something left." Marley reached across the desk, picked up the ring, and placed it in Carson's palm. "Feel that. The Lion of Judah, the weight of something real. You are not finished, Mr. Carson. The man in the dark room, he is the real one. And he is still here." Carson looked down at the ring. His jaw tightened. His shoulders dropped half an inch. The mask didn't shatter, it softened, the way ice softens in the first minutes of a thaw. He placed the ring back on the desk. Neither spoke for 4 seconds. Two men sitting in the wreckage of the walls they had just taken down, with 300 strangers watching. Here is what the audience did not know. Bob Marley did not come to The Tonight Show to promote an album. 3 weeks earlier, at the Stanley Theater in Pittsburgh, Marley had been singing Redemption Song when his voice failed. Not faded, failed. The note he reached for was not there. He finished the show on muscle memory alone. After the concert, his sound engineer Errol Brown sat with him in the dressing room. Brown would later describe Marley's face as the calmest terror I had ever seen, like a man watching his house burn from across the street. What Marley did next he had never done before. He picked up a battered acoustic guitar from one of the roadies and played Redemption Song alone. No band, no audience, just his voice and the silence of an empty room. Weeks later, producer Chris Blackwell heard the first studio take and said, "Bob, this song doesn't need an orchestra, just you and the guitar." It became the only track in Marley's career recorded completely alone. A man and 6 strings and the knowledge that time was no longer something he could count on. The Tonight Show was the same impulse. One more chance to sit across from someone and say the thing without the performance wrapped around it. To speak, not sing. To be heard, not cheered. When the camera stopped, Carson stood from behind the desk, something he rarely did before a guest had left. He walked around the desk, put his hand on Marley's shoulder, and said something the boom mic did not catch. He walked Marley to the green room himself. They sat together for another 40 minutes. A stagehand passing the door swore he heard an acoustic guitar, just a few chords barely audible through the wall, and a voice singing softly. "It didn't sound like a performance," he said. "It sounded like a prayer." NBC's switchboard logged over 14,000 calls before midnight. Letters arrived at the studio for weeks, some addressed to Marley, some to Carson, a surprising number addressed simply to the episode with the ring. Dermatology clinics across the eastern United States reported a measurable increase in melanoma screenings in the weeks that followed. No campaign, no press release. A man had told the truth on television, and people had listened. NBC never rebroadcast the episode. No explanation was given. Bob Marley continued touring through the summer of 1980. The cancer spread to his lungs, his brain, his stomach. He played his final concert on September 23, 1980, at the Stanley Theater in Pittsburgh, the same stage where his voice had cracked. He collapsed jogging in Central Park 2 days later. On May 11, 1981, Marley died in Miami. He was 36. His final words to his son Ziggy, "Money can't buy life." When his effects were cataloged, the Lion of Judah ring was still on his finger. Johnny Carson retired in 1992. In one of the rare interviews he gave near the end, he was asked which guest had stayed with him the longest. He didn't give a name. He said, "There was one night, one guest, who asked me to feel the weight of something real, and I still feel it." Carson died on January 23, 2005. Somewhere between Kingston and Burbank, between a ring and a desk, between a man who carried messages and a man who carried masks, something true had passed between them. Not a performance, not an interview, just two men discovering that the weight of something real is the only thing that keeps you standing. If this story moved you, subscribe right now. Share it with someone who has been carrying something heavy and pretending they are fine. Drop a comment. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. And tell me this, who sees through your mask the way Carson saw through Marley's? Because somewhere right now, someone is sitting in a dark room, convinced they are unfinished. Maybe all they need is one person to sit with them and not leave.